A bucket of cold water drenched the handmade dress her mother sewed. Laughter exploded down the hallway, but Kiana didn't fall. Like the video, subscribe to the channel because from that moment of humiliation begins a journey that will silence the entire school. A bucket of icy water slammed into Kiana like a blow from the sky, soaking her small brown-skinned frame in a shock of cold and triggering an explosion of laughter down the hallway. Dirty rainwater mixed with mud splattered across her pale blue evening dress. The same dress her mother had painstakingly sewn stitch by stitch for 3 months just so she could have one memorable night at the school dance. Her whole body trembled, her carefully braided hair sagged under the weight of water and mascara streamed down her cheeks, leaving her looking like a broken doll tossed into the gutter. "Oh my God, look at her!" Our little princess turned into a sewer rat. Jennifer, the most popular blonde at school, shrieked gleefully, clutching her stomach as she doubled over in laughter. The crowd of students, all polished tuxedos and glittering gowns, burst into a fresh wave of laughter, a few whipping out their phones to capture the spectacle as if it were their evening's entertainment. Kiana froze water, dripping steadily from her dress, pooling around her feet on the marble floor. Her shaking hands tried to wipe her face, but the cold mud only smeared the cheap makeup she had scrimped for weeks to afford. "Guess you can scratch prom queen off the list, Kiana," a tall kid in a baseball cap jeered. "Maybe you should compete for disaster of the year instead." The laughter roared even louder, sharper, crueler, ripping through her like shards of glass. "Enough!" a voice rang out from the far end of the hallway. Heads turned. It was Daniel, the white boy, who among all these polished faces had been the only one to ever offer Kiana a genuine smile instead of a sideways glance. Daniel stormed forward, fury blazing in his eyes. "You think this is funny?" he barked, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Picking on someone who can't fight back. That's your entertainment." Jennifer smirked, arms folded. "Aw, sticking up for her, Daniel? Careful, might catch something." Another voice snickered. "Bet he's into exotic tastes." Daniel ignored them. He stripped off his black formal jacket and wrapped it gently around Kiana's shaking shoulders. He leaned down and whispered, "Come on, don't let them see you cry." Kiana stared at him, stunned, unable to process what was happening. Under the hundreds of staring eyes, she stumbled forward, heels squeaking on the wet floor. Daniel steadying her with a firm hand. They walked out of the hallway, leaving behind a trail of dripping water and a silence slowly spreading through the crowd. Down a dimly lit side corridor, Daniel finally stopped pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and carefully dabbing at the mascara streaks on Kiana's face. "Why do you let them do this to you?" he asked quietly. Kiana bit her lip, her dark brown eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm used to it," she whispered. "Nobody cares anyway." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Then it's time to change that," he said, lifting his gaze to meet hers. "I'll teach you judo, enough to make sure this never happens again." Kiana let out a broken laugh, half bitter, half weary. "Me, look at me," she gestured to herself. Water still dripping from the tattered dress, her small frame shivering. "I'm like a coat hanger." Daniel's face hardened with conviction. "Strength isn't about size, Kiana," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about deciding you're worth fighting from." She looked at him, eyes wide, stunned by the earnestness in his voice. And in that fragile, flickering moment, after months of loneliness, humiliation, and silence, a tiny ember flared to life deep inside her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to live invisible anymore. Maybe she could learn to lift her head again. Maybe this was where it started. Kiana once believed that if she stayed quiet enough, if she folded herself small enough, the kids at Brookstone would eventually forget she existed. But Brookstone wasn't the kind of place where a small, brown-skinned girl could disappear so easily. On the first day back after spring break, Kiana was opening her locker when something soft and wet slammed into her chest. She stumbled backward, her books scattering across the hallway floor. A shrill laugh pierced the air like a knife. "Oh, sorry, didn't see you there," a blonde girl said coolly, her blue eyes gleaming with defiance. In her hand was a half-eaten hamburger, the greasy patty slipping out of the bun and smearing across the front of Kiana's uniform shirt. Kiana stammered, I, but the crowd had already closed in, clapping and whooping like they had just witnessed the night's best comedy act. A tall boy in a baseball cap nodded approvingly. "No worries, Kiana. You look tastier than the burger anyway." The hallway erupted with laughter again, louder, sharper, more vicious. Kiana ducked her head, hands trembling, as she knelt to gather her scattered books. Grease and dirt soaked into her shirt, heavy and shameful, wrapping around her like chains. No one helped, no one said a word. Noah, the chubby white boy who was usually the target of his own cruel jokes, stood at a distance, clutching the strap of his backpack, his eyes wide and stricken. But he didn't move. And in that moment, Kiana understood something brutal. In this place, silence was a form of complicity. A week later came the second blow. During gym classes, the students lined up for the endurance run test. Kiana shuffled to the starting line in a hand-me-down tracksuit from her cousin, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and knees. Just as she placed her foot on the line, a voice rang out, "Make way for the brown snail!" Laughter burst out like fireworks. Jennifer and her clique, all dressed in gleaming Nike and Adidas gear, dropped to the ground, wriggling across the track in slow, exaggerated motions, chanting in unison, "Brown snail, brown snail." Kiana stood frozen, her throat tight, hands clutching the hem of her worn-out sweatshirt. The gym coach, a thick-set man with cold eyes, barely spared her a glance before barking, "What are you waiting for, Brown, run!" Kiana swallowed the lump in her throat, lowered her head, and ran. Each step was heavy, dragging through the chorus of mocking laughter and pounding sneakers behind her. "Brown snail! Move it, slug!" Their voices chased her down the track, stinging like wasps. When the run finally ended, Kiana collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath. She heard the giggles before she felt the weight on her back. Someone had drawn a giant snail in black marker across her shirt, scrawling the words, "Brown the snail," beneath it. No one was punished. No one was reprimanded. At Brookstone, cruelty wasn't an accident. It was a tradition. Kiana sat there, fists clenched in the fabric of her stained shirt, her eyes burning but dry. "I won't cry," she whispered to herself, nails digging into her palms. "I won't give them that." That night, Kiana stood in front of the tiny bathroom mirror in their cramped apartment, staring hard at her reflection. A thin, brown-skinned girl, wild curls frizzing around her tired face, dark circles under her eyes. "Who am I?" she whispered. "A snail, a joke." The answer rose from deep inside her, small but unshakable. "No, I am Kiana. And one day they'll remember my name, not with laughter, but with respect." And in the darkness, against the distant wail of city sirens, a small, stubborn light flickered to life inside her chest, fragile but impossible to extinguish. The days that followed blurred together like a recurring nightmare. Kiana couldn't wake from. She moved through Brookstone like a shadow slipping between crowded hallways, shrinking herself as small as possible, hoping, praying to go unnoticed. But at Brookstone, silence was never enough to earn forgiveness. One Monday morning, Kiana found a piece of paper stuffed into her locker. A crude, ugly drawing, a small, brown-skinned girl drowning in a pit of mud with bubbles floating around her that read, "Shut up." Kiana crumpled the paper in her fist, her heart hammering against her ribs, her face burning. She whirled around, searching the hallway, but all she found were averted gazes, noses buried in phones or textbooks. No one admitted anything. No one stood up, alone in a sea of faces. During English class, Kiana sat hunched over her notebook, trying to focus on copying notes. From the front row, Jennifer tossed a small folded slip of paper onto her desk. Kiana unfolded it with trembling fingers, scrawled in harsh red ink, "Go back to your ghetto. Don't dirty our air." Kiana looked up and locked eyes with Jennifer. The blonde's lips twisted into a smirk, so cold it froze the blood in Kiana's veins. "Is there a problem, Kiana?" the teacher droned, not even glancing up from his lesson plan. Kiana swallowed the lump rising in her throat, crushed the paper in her palm, and shook her head. "No, sir." The lesson continued as if nothing had happened, as if she were invisible, as if her existence didn't matter at lunch. Kiana sat alone in the farthest corner of the cafeteria. She picked at a cold, soggy sandwich her mother had packed that morning, watching the clusters of students laugh and jostle each other over trays piled with steaming pizza and crisp salads. She had once dreamed of slipping into those circles, of being pulled into easy conversations of belonging, but every attempt had been crushed by a single glance, a wrinkle of a nose, a whispered word. So she stayed small, out of sight, out of mind. "You smell like the garbage you came from," a voice sneered from the next table. A blonde girl wrinkled her nose theatrically. Her friends burst into laughter. Kiana bowed her head, lower fists clenching until her sandwich squished and oozed between her fingers. No one said anything. No one frowned. No one intervened. Loneliness seeped into her pores. settled heavy and cold inside her chest. Kiana didn't cry. She had stopped crying long ago. Now there was only a hollow ache where tears used to live. She rose quietly, left her untouched tray behind, and slipped out into the courtyard where the autumn wind howled through barren trees, scattering dead leaves like broken promises. She dropped onto a cracked stone bench and stared up at the gray sky. "Why?" she whispered, her voice ragged. "Why was I born like this?" No answer. Only the wind, cold and indifferent. In that moment, Kiana realized something sharp and undeniable. If she kept waiting for someone to fight for her, she would be crushed into dust. If she wanted to survive, she would have to stand up on her own. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to them, but to protect the last shred of dignity. She had left. Kiana clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles blanched white. No one would defend her, fine. She would learn to defend herself, even if it meant starting from nothing. Even if it meant clawing her way up from the mud they tried to drown her in. And from that day forward, deep inside Kiana's bruised, aching heart, a vow took root. I will never let anyone make me bow my head again. It only took a few weeks for the jokes at Brookstone to turn into real cuts. No more pretending. No more accidents. Kiana realized it one damp Wednesday morning when she opened her locker and a downpour of shredded paper rained down on her, mixed with something sticky that matted her hair and clung to her shoulders. She screamed, stumbling backward, her vision blurring from shock. The hallway exploded into laughter. Jennifer stood nearby pretending to film with her phone, a smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. "Somebody clean up the school's trash heap. It's starting to stink," she crowed. A red-haired boy yelled, "Hey, turns out they let animals enroll now." The crowd erupted, clapping and howling like they'd just witnessed a brilliant show. Kiana shivered, standing up, pieces of slimy paper sliding off her uniform. She clenched the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her eyes darted around, searching for anything, anyone, a sympathetic look, a hand reaching out, a sign she wasn't completely alone. Nothing, only blank stares, mocking smiles. A sea of backs turning away. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, swallowed the lump in her throat and walked toward the bathrooms, each step heavier than the last, as if she was dragging the whole world behind her. But it didn't stop there. The fourth time came that very afternoon during art class. Kiana, trying desperately to disappear, sat in the farthest corner, focused on shading the final touches of her semester project. When she bent over her watercolor set, a crashing sound split the air and a can of deep red paint toppled straight onto her head, splattering her painting, her uniform, her carefully braided hair. She froze. Cold paint dripped down her forehead, slid down the back of her neck. The classroom howled. "Oh my God, sorry!" a blonde girl gasped theatrically, hand clamped over her mouth in fake horror. From across the room, Jennifer shouted, "Hey, at least now you finally have some color." The room roared with laughter, chairs scraping back, hands pounding desks like a vicious, roaring chorus. The art teacher, a frail woman with thick glasses, only sighed wearily and waved her hand. "Go clean yourself up, Brown, and tidy this mess afterward. No punishment for the ones who did it. No concern for the one covered in paint." Kiana staggered to her feet, hands trembling as she scooped up the ruined papers into a sodden pile, then shuffled out of the room under the rain of laughter behind her. She stumbled into the bathroom, yanked off her stained uniform shirt, and scrubbed at her hair under the tiny cracked sink. The freezing water numbed her scalp. She bit her lip until she tasted blood again, forcing herself not to cry. "Don't cry, Kiana," she whispered, staring at her blurred reflection. "Don't ever let them see you break." When she finally looked up, a stranger stared back. A small, dark-skinned girl with wild hair and paint streaked across her face. But buried deep in those dark eyes beneath the exhaustion and humiliation, there flickered a tiny coal of pride, smoldering but alive. "You will not break," Kiana told the mirror. "You'll show them you're not as easy to shatter as they think." And from that cold bathroom with red paint dripping onto the cracked tile floor, Kiana made herself a promise she would find a way to stand, even if she had to learn from scratch. Even if she had to endure 100 more humiliations, because if she didn't, she would remain nothing but a target for the rest of her life. And Kiana swore she would never let anyone else decide who she was supposed to be. That Friday, when Kiana trudged into math class wearing the same old uniform, still stained faintly from the paint, stunt days ago, she knew something was coming. She didn't even need to look. She could feel the stares, hear the deliberate whispers aimed right at her. How does she still have the guts to show her face? A girl's voice floated from behind. Guess she thinks she's a superhero who can't feel shame. Another snickered, laughter low and sharp. After Lowen. Kiana took a deep breath and rushed to her usual seat at the back of the room, head down, pretending to dig through her bag like she could somehow disappear. The teacher hadn't arrived yet. The crowd started to close in like predators catching the scent of blood. Jennifer led the charge, her heels clacking sharply against the tile. "Hey, Kiana," she cooed sweetly. "Forget your mud umbrella today. Scared you'll go viral again?" More laughter exploded. Kiana gripped her backpack tighter, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. "Maybe we should give her a makeover." Another girl squealed, pulling a neon purple lipstick from her bag, the kind kids use to deface bathroom stalls. Jennifer snatched it eagerly. "Sit still. Kiana, I'll make you the star of the show," she sneered. Stepping closer, Kiana backed up until her spine hit the wall, hands trembling. Every alarm inside her screamed, "Don't fight, don't escalate, endure." But this time something stronger flared up inside her, an old, raw instinct to survive. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, when a voice thundered through the room like a shot. Enough! The mob froze. A tall, scruffy blonde boy in a crumpled blue hoodie stood between Kiana and the crowd. "Daniel." "What you gonna save her now, Daniel?" Jennifer sneered, hands on her hips, trying to be a hero. Daniel didn't respond. He just strode over, snatched the lipstick from Jennifer's hand, and tossed it straight into the trash can nearby. The motion was quick, clean, a slap without touching her. "Go back to your seat, Jennifer," Daniel said, voice low and solid as bedrock. "This isn't funny, and it doesn't make you look cool." The air froze solid. Jennifer's face twisted in fury, but under Daniel's hard stare, she faltered. She huffed loudly, heels stomping furiously, dragging her clique back to their desks. Kiana remained frozen in place, her heart pounding so loudly it filled her ears. Daniel turned back to her, his gaze softening. "You okay?" he asked. Voice rough. Kiana nodded automatically, barely trusting herself to move. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Sorry, I didn't know they were hassling you this bad. I'm not gonna let it happen again," Kiana stammered. "Why?" Daniel shrugged, a tired half-smile flickering across his face. "Because I hate pack bullies. And because you deserve someone standing with you." Kiana pressed her lips together, blinking fast. Not because she was hurt, but because for the first time in months, someone had actually stepped forward. Not out of pity, not out of bravado, but simply because it was right. The teacher swept into the classroom right after, oblivious to the confrontation that had just unfolded. The class fell into a strained, brittle silence, except for the thundering beat of Kiana's heart. But this time it wasn't beating out of fear. It was beating out of something new. Hope. After class, while the crowd slowly drifted out of the room, Daniel lingered behind and walked over to Kiana. She packed up her books slowly, still dazed from what had just happened. "Kiana," Daniel said, his voice low and a little rough, like always. "You got 5 minutes, I want to talk." Kiana hesitated, hugging her books tight to her chest, then nodded. Daniel motioned for her to follow. They cut through an empty hallway where the last shards of sunlight slanted through the dusty windows. They sat down on the cracked stone steps. Daniel rummaged through his backpack and pulled out a worn white headband, holding it out to her. "You know what this is?" Kiana shook her head, confused. "This is a white belt from judo. Lowest rank. But the most important," Daniel said, "it marks the beginning of every fighter." Kiana took the headband, running her fingers over the frayed fabric, eyes glinting with a flicker of curiosity and doubt. What are you saying?" Daniel propped his elbows on his knees, leaning closer, locking eyes with her. "I've been doing judo since I was 8, not to fight, to defend myself and others." His voice dipped lower, shadows flashing across his face. "I know what it feels like to be cornered by a crowd. Kiana, I lived it." Kiana stared at him, stunned. Daniel, the blonde boy who looked like he belonged in glossy magazines, had been a target too. He read her question before she asked. "My family's dirt poor," he said, smiling faintly. "Growing up, the rich kids tore me apart for not wearing the right shoes, not having a flashy phone. But judo taught me how to stand tall, not for revenge, just to survive. And I think you should learn too." "Me?" Kiana let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Look at me. I'm built like a coat hanger. How the hell? You don't need say. Daniel cut her off, his voice firm. "Judo's about using their strength against them. If you have patience, I'll teach you." Kiana bit her lip, clutching the headband tighter. A big part of her wanted to say no out of fear, out of shame, out of how painfully aware she was of every weakness, but a smaller part stubborn and still breathing. Under all the wreckage, wanted to say yes. But what if they find out, she whispered. What if they laugh at me again? Daniel shrugged, smiling a little. Let them, you're not training for them. You're training for you. You want to be their punching bag forever. Or do you want to stand up on your own damn feet? The question hit her like a stone straight to the chest. Kiana lifted her head, really looked at him for the first time and nodded. A small, shaky nod, but it held. Daniel smiled and reaching out his hand. Tomorrow morning, park near my place, 6 a.m. Wear something you can move in. Kiana grasped his hand, feeling the solid, steady grip. I'm not quitting easily, she whispered. And I'm not letting you, Daniel said, voice steady as rock, and right there on that worn-out stairwell. Under the last bleeding light of day, something shifted between them. Not pity, not charity, just a quiet, fierce promise. We fight together at 6 a.m. The next morning, Kiana stood shivering under the big oak tree in Greenwood Park, wearing a set of ragged old workout clothes. Her hands shook from the cold. The early morning air was thick with mist, soaking through the thin fabric and making her look even smaller against the vastness around her. Daniel was already there, squatting down, tying his worn-out sneakers, hoodie dusted with dirt, face calm, like waking up at dawn to train was the most natural thing in the world. On time. Good, Daniel said, standing up, tossing her a water bottle and a small towel. Today we start with the basics. Kiana swallowed hard, clutching the bottle, her head still buzzing from lack of sleep. I don't think I can do this, she mumbled. Daniel smiled slightly, no mockery in his eyes, only something steady and unshakable. Won't know until you try. Let's go. The first session was hell. Daniel had her practice ukemi, the art of falling safely over and over until her back felt like it had been smashed with a hammer. Don't brace with your hands, he barked, every time her instincts made her flinch. You brace when you fall, you snap your wrist. Kiana gritted her teeth, pushed herself up again and again, grass and mud clinging to her shirt and pants. Every fall slammed the air out of her lungs. Every fall twisted the sky and ground into a dizzy blur. Don't quit, Daniel repeated like a drumbeat. Fall, get up, until fear stops owning you. The training lasted an hour but felt like a lifetime. When Daniel finally let her stop, Kiana nearly collapsed onto the wet grass, arms on her knees, chest heaving like it would explode. I don't think I can survive this, she gasped. Daniel crouched beside her, offering the water bottle again. You can, tomorrow it'll hurt a little less. The day after that, a little less again. Every time you fall and stand back up, you get stronger. But the days after weren't easier. Kiana's body screamed at her. Every morning she fought just to crawl out of bed, joints stiff and sore like someone had wrung her dry overnight. Bruises bloomed purple and green over her knees, her elbows, her hips. Sometimes halfway through sit-ups, tears would sting her eyes, not just from the pain, but from the raw humiliation of how weak she felt. I suck at this, she whispered once after crashing to the ground. For the 10th time that morning, failing a simple sweep throw, Daniel stood over her, arms folded, gaze steady. You know what, he said, voice quiet but iron solid. Judo isn't for people who are good at fighting. It's for people who aren't good, but refuse to give up. Kiana looked up at him. In his eyes, there was no pity, just stubborn, wild belief. For the first time, she realized no one was asking her to be perfect. They just needed her not to quit. That night back home, Kiana stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror. She raised her bruised arms, the yellow light washing over her exhausted but glowing face. Don't quit, she whispered, never. And the next morning, every time she hit the ground, she gritted her teeth and pushed up faster. Every time Daniel slammed her down, her breath ragged, she didn't panic anymore. Every bruise became a silent badge of honor. While other kids slept in cozy beds, Kiana was falling and rising again on freezing grass. While other kids scrolled through their phones, she was gritting through sit-ups that burned like fire. While others laughed and mocked, Kiana was forging armor over her heart piece by piece. Because this time she wasn't just fighting against them, she was fighting the fear inside herself. That day the sky hung low and gray, and the winter wind howled through the empty halls of Brookstone. Kiana walked fast past the lockers, gripping the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel it, the eyes watching her, the whispers slithering behind her back. The old instinct kicked in, telling her to duck her head lower, move faster, disappear. But this time inside the worn-out pocket of her hoodie, her calloused hands curled into tight fists. Jennifer and her pack were waiting by the corner like vultures circling a carcass. As Kiana passed by, a sudden shove from behind sent her stumbling. Before she could catch her balance, someone stuck out a foot to trip her. Kiana lurched forward, about to crash onto the cold tiles, but her body reacted before her mind even caught up. A ragged shout tore from her throat as she planted her foot, twisted her hips, and rolled over her shoulder just like all those brutal mornings of training. She hit the ground but tumbled smoothly, popping back up almost instantly, fists raised in a basic ready stance. The hallway froze in one stunned heartbeat. "Oh, look, she learned circus tricks now," Jennifer crowed, but her voice rang thinner, more uncertain. Kiana didn't cry. She didn't run. She looked Jennifer straight in the eyes, cold, steady, unflinching. "Enough," Kiana said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the corridor like a blade. "Don't touch me again." Jennifer blinked, taken aback, then sneered. "You think you scare me?" She spat and lunged. But in a flash, Kiana sidestepped, twisted her hips, and used the simplest move Daniel had taught her, Ayotoshi. With one clean, precise motion, she used Jennifer's own momentum against her, yanking her off balance. Jennifer flailed wildly, then hit the floor with a heavy thud. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to shatter the illusion of power she'd clung to for so long. Silence slammed down over the hallway. Jennifer scrambled up, red-faced, sputtering, but she couldn't seem to find the words. Her pack stood frozen behind her, wide-eyed and unsure. Kiana breathed deep, her hands still lifted in ready position, her heart hammering in her chest. But this time the beat wasn't fear, it was freedom. "I don't start fights," Kiana said, each word steady and clear. "But if you come at me again, I won't back down." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the stunned crowd in her wake like statues carved from stone. All through the rest of the day, Jennifer and her friends kept their distance. Here and there, Kiana caught wide, confused stares from across the hallways. For the first time in all these brutal months, Brookstone's endless corridors no longer felt like a maze built to crush her. She had carved out a place, tiny, fragile, but hers, when the final bell rang. Kiana walked out into the fading afternoon light, shoulders squared, chin lifted high. Daniel waited under the big oak tree, arms crossed, a slow, proud grin spreading across his face. "Heard what happened," he said, holding out a fist. "Way to go, little warrior." Kiana bumped her fist into his, her smile breaking wide and real across her bruised but shining face. "It wasn't easy," she said, breathing out a long, steady breath, "but I'm not backing down anymore." And in that moment, standing beneath the burning sunset, Kiana knew she had crossed an invisible line, from prey to protector, from victim to fighter. From that day on, no one looked at Kiana the same way. But she knew one successful fight back couldn't erase the sneers, the whispers, the contempt, etched into the halls of Brookstone. If she truly wanted to survive, if she wanted to protect the fragile foothold she'd fought so hard to claim, she would have to become stronger, strong enough that no one would dare challenge her again. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, Kiana was there under the sprawling oak of Greenwood Park. Rain or wind-cutting winter, chill or thick mist, she came wearing her worn-out tracksuit soles, nearly rubbed through hair, tied tight, eyes burning with stubborn fire. Daniel was always waiting, sometimes yawning wide enough to split his face, sometimes soaked to the bone, but always smiling that warm, patient smile. "Fall again," Daniel ordered, tapping her lightly on the shoulder. Kiana gritted her teeth, spun her body, and slammed down into the grass. The ground thudded against her back, but this time the pain was dull familiar. She rolled and popped back up into ready stance. Daniel nodded in approval. Good again. The sessions were endless: fall roll stand, throw slip counter. Sweat poured down her body, soaking her clothes, mixing with mud, and sometimes tears. Silent, stubborn tears. But Kiana never once asked to stop. On weekends, Daniel taught her more. Locks holds, how to shift her weight to unbalance someone bigger. "You don't need to be strong," he said again and again. "You need to be smart, patient." Every time she messed up, Daniel simply corrected her, never mocking, never rushing. "Slow down, feel the movement, don't rush it." And when she got it right, his eyes would light up like he was witnessing a small miracle. At school, Kiana changed too. She no longer slunk through the halls like a ghost. She walked upright, spine straight, steps firm. When old bullies passed by and muttered under their breath, she didn't flinch. She met their eyes silent, steady, unblinking. And more often than not, they were the ones who looked away first. Once in the cafeteria, a punk kid knocked a cup of juice over her tray. Kiana didn't yell, didn't run. She calmly set the tray down, walked toward him with eyes cold as stone. The boy froze, swallowed hard. She didn't even have to say a word. The way she stood there, unshakable, was enough to make him stammer out a clumsy apology and back away. At night after homework was done, Kiana practiced alone in their cramped apartment. She used a pillow as a stand-in opponent, practicing chokes, footwork rolls. Sometimes her mother would stand quietly by the door, watching her daughter soaked in sweat but glowing with fierce determination. "My girl," she would whisper to herself, tears glinting in her eyes. "She's not that fragile little thing anymore." One night after a brutal training session, Kiana sat slumped under their familiar oak tree, gasping for air. Daniel flopped down beside her, arms braced behind his back, face tilted up toward the glittering stars. "You've changed," Daniel said, voice low and rough. "Not just your moves, you're stronger inside now." Kiana smiled slow and wide, looking down at her calloused hands glowing under the tired street lamp. "I'm not afraid of falling anymore," she whispered. Daniel laughed and ruffled her hair like an older brother. That, he said, grinning wide, is the real victory. And somewhere deep in Kiana's small chest, something warm took root for the first time in her life. She wasn't afraid of someone knocking her down, because now she knew. No matter how hard she fell, she could always stand back up. That night, the Brookstone ballroom glittered under 1,000 lights. Music pulsed through the air, perfume and laughter spun across the polished floors. Kiana stood alone at the edge of it all, clutching a plastic cup of water. Her lavender dress, hand-stitched by her mother over 3 long months, hugged her small frame, making her look both fragile and defiant against the cold, swirling tide of students. She knew she wasn't welcome here, but she walked in anyway, head high, shoulders squared, gaze steady. If anyone asked, she'd say she came to dance with her own pride. As she smiled quietly to herself, sharp clicks of high heels echoed from the hall behind her. Jennifer, leading a pack of girls, her face twisted in a sneer, her eyes sparking with ugly envy. "Well, well," Jennifer said, voice dripping venom, "who let the charity case crash the party?" Her friends tittered high and cruel like knives flashing in the light. Kiana turned calm as stone. "I don't need anyone's permission to exist here," she said, her voice like frostbite. Jennifer's smile curdled into a snarl. "You want to be the center of attention," she hissed. "Fine, let's make you unforgettable." And before Kiana could react, one of the girls dragged out a giant bucket, a flash of cold silver water, and it slammed into her. The impact stole her breath. Icy wetness soaked her dress, matted her curls, smeared her mascara into dark rivers down her cheeks. Laughter roared up from the hallway, harsh, mocking, merciless. But this time Kiana didn't crumple. She stood her ground, fingers curled into the wet fabric at her sides. She took one step forward, her glare sharp enough to slice through the haze of jeering faces. "Enough," she said. The word cracked like a whip through the air. Jennifer laughed brittle and high and lunged, shoving forward to humiliate her again. But Kiana was fast. In a blur, she sidestepped, seized Jennifer's wrist, and locked it in a swift, precise Ude Garami arm entanglement, exactly how Daniel had taught her. Jennifer screamed, buckling to the floor. Her arm twisted, her face contorted in shock and fear. The ballroom froze. Silence fell so hard it hurt. Kiana released her at once, letting Jennifer collapse without real injury. No violence, no revenge, just control, just defense. Kiana turned and walked away. Water dripped from her ruined dress, leaving bold, defiant footprints across the marble floor. Dozens of eyes followed her, stunned, silent, awestruck, across the room. Daniel stood quietly, sleeves rolled up, a slow, proud smile pulling at his lips. When their eyes met, Kiana nodded once, no words needed. They both knew she had won. Not with fists, but with dignity, with discipline, with every bruise and drop of sweat and stubborn sunrise she had fought through to become unbreakable. In a night of fake glitter and empty glamour, brightest light was the small brown girl who saved herself. Not because of a dress, not because of a stage, because she had become her own hero. The next morning when Kiana pushed open the front doors of Brookstone, the air seemed to freeze for one strange, heavy heartbeat. Conversations died mid-sentence. Phones vanished into pockets. Eyes that once dripped contempt now flickered with something else, hesitation, uncertainty, and a hint of respect. Kiana felt every gaze trailing her as she walked down the hall. She caught whispers snapping through the air like electric wires. "That's her." She dropped Jennifer with one move. "I thought she was weak." Each murmur brushed against her skin, not like a blade this time, but like a breeze she could simply walk through. Jennifer wasn't at school that day. Rumor had it she'd taken a sick day after slipping in the hallway. No one dared say more. And no one dared touch Kiana again. When she entered math class, the usual snickers were absent. Madison, who had once laughed the loudest, peeked up and quickly ducked her head. Even Mr. Green, the teacher who had always turned a blind eye, stuttered slightly when their eyes met. Good morning, Kiana." He mumbled something he had never done before. Kiana gave a small nod. No smile, no unnecessary words. She moved to her seat, unpacked her books with calm precision. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. She no longer needed to shrink. She no longer needed to pretend she didn't hear, didn't see. She had carved out space for herself, earned it with grit. Not permission. At lunch, as Kiana read under her usual tree, a shadow fell across her book. She looked up to find Kyle, one of the boys who used to tag along in the bullying, standing awkwardly, hands jammed deep in his pockets, face burning red. I just wanted to say," he stammered. "Yesterday you were awesome." He kicked at the dirt, voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything." Kiana looked at him for a long moment. Not cold, not forgiving, simply unshaken. She closed her book, nodded once. "Thanks," she said, then returned to her reading without another word. Because now Kiana understood. Forgiveness wasn't something she owed anyone, nor was acceptance. Sometimes it was enough to let people wrestle with their own shame and leave them to it. In our class, the same teacher who once ignored her humiliation now awkwardly assigned Kiana as group leader for the upcoming showcase. "I think you have a good eye for design," the woman said. "Too bright, too forced." Kiana knew exactly where this sudden recognition came from. She accepted it anyway. Not because she needed their validation, but because she was now strong enough to stand above their smallness. That afternoon, passing a tall glass wall in the hallway, Kiana caught her reflection. Small frame, deep brown skin, curls still wild from the wind, but her eyes burned bright like a flame no storm could touch, and she knew. No matter how they looked at her now, they would never again reach the core of who she was. Kiana Brown was no longer prey. She was a fighter. When the flyer for Brookstone's internal sports competition went up on the main bulletin board, Kiana barely glanced at it out of habit more than curiosity. She had never imagined herself competing in anything physical at this school, the place that once crushed her, humiliated her, drowned her under waves of laughter. But this time something inside her stirred. Under the bold headline, one line stood out in sharp black ink: self-defense demonstration. Choose your style. That afternoon, Daniel found Kiana folding the flyer into a tiny paper boat. "You thinking of signing up?" he asked, mischief glinting in his eyes. Kiana snorted. "Me, get up there and put on a show for everyone, so they can laugh even harder." Daniel shook his head, voice steady. "Not for them to laugh, for you to prove you're not the girl they remember." He sat down beside her, his tone softening. "They used to mock you because they never saw your real strength. This is your chance to show it." Kiana stared at the paper boat for a long moment. Then she looked up, and in her eyes something fierce and wild caught fire. "All right," she said, "I'm in." Daniel grinned and clapping her lightly on the shoulder. "That's the fighter I know." The next 3 weeks were brutal. Mornings before sunrise, afternoons after school, late nights under the flickering glow of streetlights. Kiana and Daniel drilled every movement, every breakfall, every counter. She learned to harness strength, to breathe through fear, to turn every attack into an opening. When competition day arrived, the small Brookstone gym was packed. Students, teachers, even parents buzzing with anticipation. Music thumped, the crowd roared, and tension crackled in the air. When Kiana's name was announced, a ripple went through the audience, not excitement, but curiosity. That girl, the one who used to get pushed around. Kiana stepped into the center of the mat, dressed in a simple white judo gi, her white belt tied neat and proud. She scanned the crowd, not seeking approval, but searching for truth. In the front row, Daniel raised a fist in silent solidarity. Her mother stood beside him, clutching her purse tight, eyes brimming but smiling wide. The whistle blew. Her opponent, a boy nearly a head taller, charged at her. The crowd sucked in its breath, but Kiana didn't flinch. She pivoted, let his momentum carry him, and executed a clean throw. The boy hit the mat with a crisp, solid thud. The gym erupted, first a gasp, then a roar. Kiana bowed respectfully, moved back to center. Match after match, she flowed through her opponents, calm, focused, relentless. No boasting, no cruelty, only precision, only the silent statement carved into every throw, every lock. I am here, I am strong, I will not bow. When the final match ended and the referee pointed toward her, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then applause staggered at first, then swelling like a tidal wave. Kiana stood in the center of it all, sweat dripping from her brow, chest heaving, eyes blazing. She wasn't looking for cheers. She wasn't looking for redemption. She had already found what she came for herself. Under the fierce blaze of the setting sun, Kiana Brown was no longer the girl who once ducked and fled down Brookstone's halls. She had become something more, a living symbol of defiance and dignity. News of Kiana's overwhelming victory at Brookstone's internal tournament spread like wildfire. That Monday morning when she walked through the school gates, there were no mocking glances, no snickers, no whispered insults riding the air like poisoned dart. Instead, there were quick, sideways looks tinged with awe, murmured words dripping half with respect, half with envy. Some students who'd never even acknowledged her presence before now hurriedly stepped aside when she passed, as if her quiet strength could somehow brush against them, just by proximity. "Hey, Kiana," a hesitant voice called out from the hallway. She turned. It was Sarah, the same girl who once giggled when paint had been dumped on Kiana's head. Sarah fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, face flushed. I just wanted to say you were amazing on Saturday. I never thought someone small like you could be that strong." Kiana gave a small nod, a fleeting cool smile brushing her lips. "Thanks," she said simply. No bitterness, no need for forgiveness. In the cafeteria, a few underclassmen huddled together, whispering excitedly. One little girl with twin braids worked up the courage to approach, clutching a tiny notebook. Cheeks burning bright red. "Miss Kiana, can I have your autograph?" she stammered. The entire cafeteria seemed to freeze mid-bite. Kiana paused a moment, then smiled gently and signed her name with a neat slanted scrawl. "Always believe in yourself," she wrote. Her phone began buzzing with messages from people she never thought would even remember her name. "You really inspired me, and you made me want to try out for the martial arts club. I'm sorry for staying silent before." Each message a small piece of slow, stubborn acknowledgement. Daniel, of course, stayed exactly the same, trailing behind her with his battered backpack slung over one shoulder, scarfing down a sandwich, waving like an idiot. "So," he grinned, mouth half full, "how's Brookstone's rising martial arts star handling her new fan club?" Kiana laughed a real clear laugh like silver bells. "I don't need a fan club." She shook her head, eyes gleaming. "I just want them to remember one thing. Nobody has the right to look down on someone else because of the color of their skin or where they come from." That afternoon, after their regular judo practice in Greenwood Park, a small group of kids began gathering shyly at the edges of the grass. One red-headed boy kicked at the dirt nervously, then piped up, "Miss Kiana, can I train with you? I want to learn to stand up for myself too." Kiana glanced at Daniel, saw him nodding with quiet encouragement. She knelt down so she was eye level with the boy, smiled warmly. "Of course," she said. "Let's learn how to stand tall together." Bit by bit, inch by inch, Kiana's quiet strength rippled outward like stones dropped into a still pond. No grand speeches, no banners, no slogans. Just by existing stubbornly, fiercely, unapologetically, she had taught Brookstone a lesson. No classroom could self-respect, inner strength, unbreakable persistence. As the last light of the sun spilled across the empty school grounds, Kiana sat alone under the old oak tree, hands clasped, eyes watching the horizon. She wasn't dreaming of being a hero. She wasn't craving applause. She knew one simple truth. She had changed. And somewhere, quietly, patiently, the world was changing too. Slowly but surely. Not everything changed. Brookstone, though shaken by what Kiana had done, still held onto its stubborn stones, the ones that littered the cold, lifeless hallways. There were still eyes burning with silent hatred, still tight-lipped, bitter smiles masking the resentment boiling underneath. And Jennifer was one of them. The once reigning queen of the corridors now walked with her head bowed, every step weighed down by the crushing gravity of broken pride. But deep inside, the hatred hadn't cooled. It had only hardened. Jennifer and a few leftover followers still tried to claw Kiana down, using sly whispers, half loud enough to sting, shooting poison glances whenever she walked past. One afternoon at the sports field, as Kiana was patiently showing a group of younger students how to fall safely, Jennifer strutted by, loud enough for everyone to hear. "New game, huh?" From victim to professor. Just like that, a chorus of weak, forced laughter followed. The field fell into a heavy, awkward silence. Kiana's hands clenched by reflex, her heart skipping. Once, old instincts screamed, "Snap back, humiliate them, tear them down." But instead she breathed deeply, shoulders loose, spine straight. She turned away not from fear but from sheer silent strength and continued correcting the clumsy stance of a red-haired boy fumbling his balance. "Keep your back straight. Breathe. Remember, a warrior doesn't waste time answering noise." Jennifer froze her hands, squeezing the strap of her designer bag until her knuckles turned bone white. Kiana didn't even spare her a glance. And in that moment, the most brutal blow wasn't a shout or a shove. It was being completely, magnificently ignored. In class, the whispers still buzzed, smaller, now weaker. A few snide smiles cracked open whenever Kiana raised her hand, but her voice rang with such quiet certainty that the laughter had nowhere to land anymore. Teachers called on her without hesitation. Classmates who once sneered now hesitated before asking her for help with homework. The old, rotting cycle of mockery had crumbled from within. Kiana didn't need to smash it to pieces. It was already collapsing under the weight of its own irrelevance. One late afternoon, Kiana and Daniel sat by the empty basketball courts, lazily chewing through sandwiches from the cafeteria. Daniel tossed a crumpled napkin into the breeze and asked, voice casual, "Do you ever want to get back at them? You know, really make them pay?" Kiana paused, chewing thoughtfully, then shook her head. "No," she said quietly, voice steady like iron. "Revenge means I'm still trapped inside their past. I'd rather live inside my own future." Daniel let out a low whistle, grinning sideways. "You've grown up, kid." Kiana arched an eyebrow and without warning, chucked the sandwich wrapper square at his head. Their laughter, raw and genuine, scattered into the golden twilight. That night, sitting by the cracked windowsill of their cramped apartment, Kiana watched the distant city lights flicker. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vengeful. She felt at peace because she understood something most people never would. You don't win by shouting louder. You don't win by swinging harder. You win by walking forward, calm, unshaken, and never looking back, because the true victor isn't the one who destroys every enemy behind them. It's the one who forgives themselves, keeps walking, and leaves their haters choking in the dust of time. The Brookstone year-end ceremony took place under the blazing early summer sun, where every tree on campus seemed to catch fire with bright yellow blossoms. The stadium had been transformed into a grand stage draped in pure white silk. Long rows of chairs lined up perfectly packed with students, teachers, and parents in their finest clothes. Kiana sat among the middle rows. Her uniform neatly pressed, a simple white midi dress, fluttering lightly in the breeze. In her hands was an invitation card printed in shimmering gold letters. Special student address, Kiana Brown. She ran her fingertips over the words, her heart a tangle of emotions. A year ago, she was just a shadow slipping through the sneers and stares. Today, she was here not to beg for acceptance, but to speak in her own voice. The microphone buzzed softly. The principal stepped onto the stage, voice formal and heavy. "Today, we honor not just academic and athletic achievements, but resilience. We honor someone who showed us that human dignity cannot be crushed if one knows how to stand. Please welcome Kiana Brown." Applause broke out, not frantic, not forced, but real. Kiana inhaled deeply, rose to her feet, and walked steadily toward the stage. Her steps were firm, her head high. The entire stadium held its breath. She stood before the microphone, gripping her notes tightly. At first, then slowly, deliberately, she lowered them. She lifted her head, looking straight into the sea of faces. Her voice rang out clear and unwavering. "A year ago, I walked through Brookstone's halls like a shadow. I thought if I stayed small enough, silent enough, the world would leave me alone. I was wrong." She paused, letting her words settle. "The problem was never my existence. The problem was how they chose to see me. A small black girl, with nothing but stubborn determination. A wave of silence swept over the stands. Even those who once laughed couldn't move. I learned that dignity isn't something anyone can hand you or take away. Dignity is what you hold on to when the whole world turns its back. And I learned that strength isn't measured in muscle or reputation. It's in whether you have the courage to lift your head after every time you are shoved down. She stopped again, eyes burning with a quiet fire. Down below, Daniel sat straight-backed, his eyes shining. Her mother clutched a handkerchief, tears glistening on her cheeks. A few teachers, those who had once looked away, bowed their head. "I'm not here today to boast," Kiana said, her voice steady. "I'm here for anyone who has ever felt left behind, belittled. You do not need permission to exist. You do not need to shrink yourself to fit into the narrow spaces others built for you. You are worthy because you exist." The last line echoed through the air. A beat of silence, then applause, slow at first. Scattered, swelled into a roaring tide that rolled across the stadium. People stood clapping until their palms turned raw. Kiana bowed, not too deep, not too humble, just enough for a warrior. As she stepped off the stage, walking past rows of clapping spectators, no one dared to look at her the way they once had. No one dared to cast her as an outsider again. She didn't need their late apologies. She had carved her name into the silent history of Brookstone, not by force, not by revenge, but by the unbreakable strength of her own heart. The year-end ceremony ended as the last golden rays of sunlight poured across the school steps. Brookstone students trickled out in colorful dresses and polished suits, laughter and chatter swirling through the evening air like a broken hive of bees. Across the wide lawn in front of the stadium, groups of friends clustered for photos, their joyous shouts rising into the open sky. Kiana walked slowly through it all, moving like a quiet breeze, cutting through the noisy crowd. Daniel ambled alongside her, his wrinkled shirt slung over one shoulder, messy blonde hair ruffled by the wind. "So how does it feel, warrior?" he asked, eyes glinting with mischief. Kiana smiled softly, a smile not flashy, not dazzling, but steady and deep, much like the journey she had walked. "Good," she said, "better than good." They passed by a cluster of old classmates. Madison, the girl who once whispered cruelly behind Kiana's back, stood awkwardly at the edge, as if wanting to step forward but shrinking back. A few familiar faces turned to watch, their eyes filled with the strange mixes of curiosity, respect, and a twinge of guilt. Kiana smiled again faintly and kept walking. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need validation. She already carried everything she needed inside her. At the front gate, her mother stood waiting, arms wrapped around a simple bouquet of wildflowers bursting with vibrant color. When she spotted Kiana, she broke into a radiant smile, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "My daughter did it," she whispered as she pulled Kiana into a tight hug, voice trembling with emotion. Kiana hugged her mother back fiercely, warmth flooding her chest. She didn't need Brookstone's approval. She had the approval of the one person who mattered most. On the ride home, the evening wind whipped through her curls, carrying the sense of sunshine, fresh grass, and familiar dusty streets. Kiana sat behind her mother on the battered motorbike, arms wrapped around that thin but unbreakable waist. She leaned back slightly, lifting her face to the endless blue sky, where soft clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, and in her chest a feeling unfurled, light, free, and full of hope. Kiana Brown, the black girl who had once been pushed down, splattered with paint, doused with freezing water at the school dance, was no longer a name muttered behind cupped hands. She had turned humiliation and pain into stepping stones. She had learned how to fall without shattering. She had learned how to rise without needing anyone's hand. One day she knew she would stumble again. She would face battles far fiercer than anything Brookstone could offer. But now Kiana carried a truth that no one could take away. She was strong, she was resilient, and she had the strength to walk forward on her own, two small but unshakable feet. As the old motorbike turned onto their familiar street, Kiana closed her eyes, letting the wind kiss her cheeks, cool, clean, and alive. And in that moment, a smile bloomed across her face, not for anyone else, not to prove anything to the world, but for herself alone. The smile of a warrior who had walked through darkness and chosen to embrace the light.